morning we're going to continue on in the book of Ruth. We're taking the book of Ruth and breaking it down. So this morning we're going to be in Ruth chapter 3, if you want to go ahead and turn there. And I got to tell you, today it gets a little weird. You ever read something and you're just like, this is a little weird. This morning our text gets just a little bit weird. But this morning I just want to recap a little as we get into the book of Ruth. If you remember, back in chapter 1, we had a guy named Eli Melech. His family were Jewish. They lived in Bethlehem. There was a famine in the land, and like every good father, he wanted to take care of his family. And so he decides, and he makes this crucial decision to move his family to Moab. And which we find out later was a really bad decision because God despised the people from Moab, the Moabites. In fact, in Psalms, he calls them his wash basin. I mean, he despised them. And so the family moves, a gal named Naomi and Elimelech and their daughters. Their daughters marry, and it's not well. Obviously, when they get to Moab, the husband Elimelech dies, and the two brothers also die, which leaves Ruth and another daughter-in-law with their mother-in-law Naomi, right? And so Ruth decides, she makes this decision that will forever change her life, and she makes a decision, and she said basically, she told Ruth, she goes, I'm going with you, because Ruth had said leave and go back to your own families, and she said no, I'm going with you. Wherever you go, I will go. Your people are my people, and your God is my God. And so she makes this decision. Remember, she's a sinful woman. She's a Moabite. They worship false gods. And so anyway, as the story's been going on, we're learning about this relationship that she has with a guy named Boaz, right? She moves back to Jerusalem, and so she's gleaning in the field one day. Just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Anybody been there? Right? Well, I call them divine appointments. If you listen to me, I call those divine appointments. Places that God puts you, and you're there for a reason, you find out, right? It was orchestrated by God. So she's gleaning in the field. And what we found out about gleaning was, so the farmers would go through the field, and anything that fell on the ground left behind, they couldn't go back and get. So the poor would come along, and the widows, and they would glean. They would take the crop, they would take what's left, and that would be how they would eat. And so, the cool thing about that was that God even had a plan for the poor back then. And so, we found out about a little bit about Boaz, that he was a man of good character. He would have been a prosperous man that had land. He treated Ruth well. We took out characteristics of, when last week I think we talked about 4 ways to find a keeper. When you're out dating and have that relationship. And also through this, and we've talked about this dating type relationship, but also the principles that we've talked about can apply to our marriage and also to our relationships. And so last week, as you remember, Ruth and Boaz have kind of hit it off, right? They kind of dated, they had this meal together, they were hitting it off really well. I guess modern day English, you would say that sparks were flying. Right? Things seemed to be looking really well. They made this connection, and then after the first date, there was nothing. Like, he ghosted her completely. He didn't contact her. He didn't send her a courtesy text to tell her, how the date went, to see if she made it home okay. So there was nothing. So there's this period of time, like they said, somewhere around 7 weeks that go by. The harvest is nearing an end, and Ruth has heard nothing. Anybody been there? Better raise your hand, tell me. Maybe not now, but at some point, right? Boy, I thought everything was going well. I guess maybe not. And at this point, Ruth is beginning to maybe doubt herself. Maybe, what did I do? What did I do wrong? Maybe I came on, too heavy or whatever it was. And so, as all good mother-in-laws do, Naomi's going to speak into Ruth's life, and she says, guess what, honey? It's time that you need to define this relationship. Anybody been there? You've been dating a while, and it's like, okay, so where are we going? I mean, what is the level of commitment? Are we just friends? Are we casual dating? Like, what's going on with this relationship? And that's where we're picking this thing up in this morning's story. If you'd look with me in chapter 3, we're going to read the first 3 verses. It says, one day Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor." Verse 3. "Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking." So Naomi's trying to help her find a husband. They move back. She knows that Ruth is a widow and that she needs a husband. And so she tells her to go. And anybody know what winnowing barley is? We have all these harvest terms. Anybody? So back in the day, what they would do was with the barley, they would take all of the crop, and there was a westward wind, and they would just kind of throw it up in the air. And the chaff would go to one side, and the good stuff, the stuff they could use, would also be in one spot. It was the way that they separated the chaff. Can you imagine doing all that now? So we're learning. To me, I think this is timely. We're learning all these harvest terms: gleaning, and this winnowing barley, as harvest has just finished up here. And they also said, interesting enough, it would also take care of pests. That sometimes the pests would go away with the chaff. So it was a way of making, basically determine how much good stuff they have. Basically, how much profit. What's the good stuff we can eat and sell, right? The rest of the stuff went over here. And so that's what they're doing. They're trying to determine this profit. She was at the threshing floor, and all of the workers are there because it's payday. Right, the workers have come. They've worked in the field through the harvest, and now they've gone through this winnowing barley, and they're gonna pay the profits out. And so she's strategizing. Ruth is strategizing again. She's the wise, Naomi. She's the wise mother-in-law, and she says he's probably going to be in a pretty good mood. Had a good harvest. They're throwing this party. There's food. And so she tells Ruth, she says, go get cleaned up. Because remember, the last couple times that I think he must have saw her, she was gleaning in the heat of the day, which means she was sweaty, her hair, her makeup, her nails, none of that was done. And so she's telling her, go get cleaned up. He's never seen you. Like, go to the beauty parlor, get the nails done, get all of this done so he can see you in a different light. But don't do it until he's finished eating and drinking. Ladies, you know that we're better when we've had our meal, right? When we're irritable, sometimes when our stomachs are empty, when we've eaten, when we've drank, and of course then we want a nap. So especially the older we get, type of thing, right? So this is where. So she's telling her, listen, get cleaned up, go to the threshing floor, all of this. And then verse 4 gets weird. Just going to tell you. Let's read it. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. I don't think I suggest this advice. Think about it. So here is Boaz. He's had the harvest, and he's kind of encamped around his profits. I mean, he's laying there where and all of that. And so Naomi basically says, go and cover his feet, lie down, and he will tell you what to do. I bet he will. Middle of the night. Again, I have to caution in this. Sometimes, so Scripture puts down what happened, right? I mean, it's given this account. I am not saying this is a great piece of advice. Sometimes mother-in-laws and mothers give good advice, and sometimes they do not. And I would tell you in this case, that's why I said this is going to get weird. And so he's laying down next to the prophets, or the crops. Verses 5 and 6 and 7, it says, I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. I mean, she respected Naomi. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law had told her to do. Verse 7, when Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly. She uncovered his feet, and she lay down. Thoughts? Anybody going, this is a really good idea? Yeah, this is Dennis thinks this is a red. So, again, this is in here. There's differing opinions. Like, so what's behind this? Is there a spiritual meaning behind why she told her to do this? And of course, if you get a bunch of theologians in a room, you got lots of different theories. One of them could have been that they were it's kind of a euphemism saying that she was trying to uncover more stuff about him. A lot of them would say that's not true, but that is one of the theories out there. Another is suggest that Ruth, she's trying to be aggressive to get his attention, which makes more sense to me. I mean, sometimes he's kind of put you off. You be a little aggressive. Now, the whole idea of uncovering his feet and laying down next to him in the middle of the night when he's laying next to the grain that he had just went through and had counted the monies and his profits and all of that. Not to mention he had been drinking, and they did drink a lot of wine back then. So, I don't know that this would have been the best thing as well. Other people would say Naomi was saying trust God's sovereignty and Boaz's integrity. So we know again that Boaz was this man of high character, right? The way he treated Ruth, the qualities that he had with her. Remember when she was gleaning in the field, he made sure she had special privileges. Kind of that nobody bothered her, nobody hit on her. He was protecting her all of this time. So kind of Ruth is being very, very forward. And remember it said, I think it was last week, we talked about that Boaz was a possibility to be Ruth's guardian, kinsman redeemer. And that basically was when a widow or someone would die, and then the closest brother then would come in and take care of the family. And so it said that there was a possibility that he could be the kinsman redeemer. And again, we talked about that and the link between Jesus and the New Testament. He is our Redeemer, right? And so there's a lot of analogies between the book of Ruth, the birth of Jesus, the genealogy that Ruth's involved in, and this whole concept of being a kinsman redeemer. But, so she's been a little forward, to say the least. She uncovers his feet in the middle of the night. She's being a little forward. She's being a little aggressive. Because let's face it, sometimes, ladies, we just don't get it. Ladies, you missed that one. As men, I guess I should qualify. As men, sometimes we just don't get it. You give us hints. We're not good with those. Right? Most of the guys, would you say, you drop hints and you say, but you should have known. No, we're not going to get it. Right? You have to be forward. You have to just say, okay, this is how it is. We get that. We get this forward thing. We may not like it, but we understand that. And so I think this is what Ruth is doing here. She's being forward. She's like, man, I thought we had this connection. Things were going well. God set this up. But I guess I have to just get your attention. So I'm uncovering your feet and I'm going to lay right down by your feet. That's kind of what she's doing here. So here's our truth today that we're finding out of the book of Ruth, and I'm going to put it up. Even if you don't get it right, God can still make it right. So even if it wasn't the right thing for her to do at that time, God can still make it right. And again, this principle applies to a lot of things in life. Right. Relationships, right? Some of us have got ourselves in relationships or have been in the past that weren't maybe God ordained, something that God had wanted. But even when we don't get it right, God is sovereign. And God can still make it right. I love that. There's so many little things that we can take out of the book of Ruth. That our God is still working. Even in relationships we get into that are all messed up and it looks like there's no hope, that God is still working in the midst of that, right? In the midst of us, He's a forgiving God and He's a gracious God. He works in all things to bring about good. So if you look back in verse 8 and 9. So in the middle of the night, something startled the man. Yeah, I imagine it did. Here's the middle of the night. He'd been drinking a little, eating, laying there. His feet are cold, I'm guessing, right? You know what it's like. You're all bundled up and all of a sudden your feet get cold. He wakes up and there's a strange woman sitting next to him. Right? So he's startled. And there's a woman laying at his feet. Who are you? He asks. I'm not sure. I think that's saying it nicely. I think he might have said something else, so I'm not positive. Who are you? I mean, here you're in the middle of the night, strange woman, so this is where he's at. He asked, or she said, I'm your servant Ruth. She said, spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. So again, Boaz, he finishes eating, drinking in a good mood. Probably just got to sleep. He was nice and warm. Suddenly his feet nobody likes their feet cold, right? Doesn't that wake you up if your feet are cold, everything else is cold. He probably wakes up like this and there's a woman laying down beside him. Now, maybe it was a good thing for him. I don't know. Maybe he thinks it was a dream. It's not, completely sure about that. She says, I'm your servant Ruth. And she's basically talking about with spread your, the garment, the kinsman redeemer thing. She's basically being forward and saying, I want you to be my redeemer. I want you to be my protector, to provide for our family in a time of need. Because he was a potential guardian redeemer, remember. And that was a very important job. But we found out also that Boaz is not even the closest person to this family. It would have been a brother of Elimelech, and we're going to probably talk about that next week a little bit more in depth, how that's going to create a little bit of a problem. And so she's saying, would you be my covering? And so let's look at verse 10. Also, some people would say that she's kind of proposing. That there's a whole lot of things that people read into it, because really Scripture isn't completely forthcoming about that. But we're going to look at verses 10 through 14. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. So he's been nice to her. And again, he compliments her, which he has always done, right? We looked at a lot of things last week when you're looking for a mate and you're looking for a keeper, or to have in our relationships. There were 4 things that we looked at. But he says, he compliments her and he says, look, you weren't going after the young men. She would have been younger. Boaz might have been older. And he's just like, you could have went after these young guys, all muscular and ripped and all that kind of thing. Instead, you're still over here, right? And so he's been very, very kind to her. And verse 11 says, and now my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. And so when I was reading that, so remember we talked about character before. We talked about the character that Ruth had. So she's going into a relationship, right? She was looking for a husband. She forsakes everything, right? She forsakes her God, her people, and goes with Naomi, her mother-in-law, and serves the one true God. So she's got this impeccable character, and he notices that. He says, the people of the town, they know you're a woman of noble character. Although it's true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there's another who is more closely related than I, and I'd said that previously. Verse 13, stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. So he said basically, he has an opportunity, it's his call. He's closer to you, and everything would say that it's, if he wants to do this, then he should do it. But if not, I'm going to do what you ask. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. Verse 14, so she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. So they spend the night together. That's basically what's happening, right? She comes in, she's laying at his feet, and they're spending the night together. So Scripture doesn't talk, they were both of high character, so the assumption is they didn't have sex, right? I mean, that's the assumption. But a lot of people would read in and go, okay, so and I've heard this, especially as a youth pastor, I've heard this question 1,000 times. And it's this. How far is too far? Heard it. Heard it from girls. Heard it from guys. Right? So how far? So where's this line? We talked about boundaries before. So where is this line And how close can they get to it with God being okay? Right? I mean, maybe parents, this is a great discussion to have with your kids as they're going into relationships. I mean, how far is too far? What does God look at and bless? What's legal and what's not legal according to God? How close can we get to the line? Well, let me give you a verse, and I love this. It's in Song of Solomon. And I found this, and it says, "Promise me, O woman of Jerusalem, not to awaken love until the time is right." I think I'd write that one down. That's a great verse. So in other words, where is the line? Remember I told you before, especially, and again, this isn't just our young people. These are other people as we get older and maybe a spouse dies or whatever it is, and we're back looking for relationships. Or we're a grandparent, we have grandkids, and all of these things come up about the line and boundaries and all of those things. That says it perfectly. Not to awaken love until the time is right. Because, we all know, we've all been there, could probably share our own experiences of having boundaries or not having boundaries. But that question has come up more often than not about what is exactly, how do you keep purity? And probably if a couple is sitting there and there's a line and the question is how close do I get to the line, they're probably not going to keep the purity, right? Because a boundary is, okay, so we're not going to get anywhere near this. It isn't the fact that we're going to get all the way to this, we're going to wade into this, but it's still, right? Because it's an attitude of our heart. That's why I think the book of Ruth and the things we're talking about are relationship principles. But they're really great for young people that are kind of going through this relationship thing, trying to find out exactly the person that God has for them. Because, God has blessings upon relationships if we do it the right way. And we want to honor people's purity. And so that's what Boaz was doing. Remember, he was a man of impeccable character. He wasn't putting pressure, and we hear that today, right? We putting pressure going, really, if you love me? That line has been around as long, as Satan's temptation after the temptation of the garden, right? If you love me, you do this. Right? He wasn't doing that. He respected her purity. And you remember back then that widows a lot of times, the way they made money was prostitution. So that would have been the thing. People would have known that, but he respected her. He guarded her purity. But I love that. Do not awaken love until the time is right. And again, the time to have a sexual relationship is in the covenant of a marriage, which I will define as one man and one woman. Right? So in our world, they try to blur that line. And again, it's not this whole thing that we're just judgmental and hating on folks. It's like, no, we love you, but Scripture says specifically that marriage is defined in a sexual relationship within marriage between one man and one woman. And again, we don't back down from that. Again, we live in a world that just wants to stutter and go, well, the Bible's, not completely true today, or it's not culturally correct. No, it says what it says and it means what it means. And so that's what's going on. Look at verse 15. Verse 15, what does Boaz do? He also said, "Bring me the shawl you're wearing and hold it out." When he did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. So again, he's treating Ruth very, very honorably. He would have been, remember, he was a guy that hung out in the fields with his workers. He blessed them. He prayed for them. He was a man of outstanding character. He loved God. And so he respects her purity. He's thinking that he might be her kinsman redeemer, the one that comes in and is her protector. Remember we talked about ladies that you need to find when you're looking for a man to spend time with and maybe to marry. You need to find someone that's a protector, that will protect your purity, that will go and do anything for you, right? And we talked about guys the same way, that you need to be honorable. You need to have these characteristics in your life as you're looking for a mate as well. So Boaz is all in at this point. And so you would think at this point that the story that, okay, so they're kind of gotten back together, it's a little maybe not what we would think about how they reunited with her pulling the covers back and uncovering his feet and laying down beside him. But the aggressive forward thing, it seems like maybe it's working out. Maybe this is what was supposed to happen all along, that everything ends up happily ever after. Well, it's not exactly the case, because next week, again, we're going to talk about another person comes into the picture. And so, because we talked about that there was someone that was even closer than Boaz, right? And so sometimes just being at the right place is not always just the easiest thing to have done. So that's in Ruth 12, he talks about there's someone closer than I. But this morning, I want to pull out 5, as we talk about ending here in a couple minutes, pull out 5 truths and talk about those briefly that we've learned this morning from the book of Ruth. And so here's the first one. It's often wise to put yourself in the right place to increase the odds of meeting the right person. So this one I'm amazed with. And I think I'm amazed because I hear people, especially Christian people, telling me, well, I just can't find the right person. And young people. And I'm like, but where you're going to a bar is not where you're going to probably find that person. It's wise to put yourself in the right place to increase the odds of meeting the right person. If you, as a Christian person, male or female, are looking for somebody you want to spend your life with that's pursuing God, there are certain places you don't want to look, right? And then there's certain places you do want to look. I would say church, and not in all cases, right? Because we know that just because somebody goes to church doesn't make them a follower of Jesus. But I also know there's a lot of people that are going to church to pursue Jesus and that relationship. They're in a small group. So the place you're at, you can increase the odds of meeting that right person. Okay? Number 2, don't overlook those who are right in front of you. I think that's pretty good advice. Right? I mean, you mean Boaz was a relative of Naomi's, right? He was right there, kinsman redeemer, so he was right in front of you, right? Crystal's not heard my sermon, so I know people keep asking, did you hear the sermon last week? And it wasn't bad by any means. I didn't think. I talked about that. Well, part of it, Crystal, and this is all truth. I talked about that I was not the most smooth person in the world back when I was dating. I know everybody was oh my gosh, because now they were all just in shock. Okay, and I even pointed out, I think, that my sister's the one that introduced us. And however, Crystal and we almost grew up together in church. So, I mean, parents kind of were at church, and we knew each other for a long time. So again, you don't want to overlook those people that are right in front of you. The people sometimes that you've grown up with, that that maybe God is doing something. Number 3, sometimes you may have to go after what you want. And again, that's the one I think that in relationships, I think in our marriage, sometimes you do have to do that. But the caution here is you can't be a person that kicks doors open to make things happen that God doesn't want to happen. There's wisdom in that. Sometimes you do have to go after what you want. You see, you're dating, you're a young person, you're like, man, I just feel like that God's drawn me to that guy or that girl. And you do go after. If God's telling you that, right? Number 4. Even if you don't get it right, God can still make it right. I love that. And that's not just with relationships. And it is with relationships. Right? Even if you don't get it right, and again, this is where, we've talked about before that we shouldn't be unequally yoked, and sometimes we make the mistake, right? And we do that. That doesn't mean God gives up. That doesn't mean there is no hope, because a lot of times, even if we don't do it right or get it right, God can still make it right. Because He's forgiving, and He loves us, and He's sovereign, and He's always working. So I hope that's encouragement for some of you this morning. You're like, but my spouse isn't serving God. God can still make it right. He can. Number 5. And this to me is the most important, especially as a young person. If you want a marriage that honors God in the future, live a life that honors Him today. And again, we can apply that to our own marriages as well, right? If we want our marriage to honor God now, we need to live for a life that honors God. But especially young people